Luck on Sunday, proudly sponsored by Al Basti Equiworld Dubai.
Good morning, welcome to the show. We begin with the saddest news imaginable. Lester Piggott has died at the age of 86. The foremost jockey of his generation, perhaps any generation. Certainly the most recognisable face, figure, household name in the sport post-war. He has died peacefully in the early hours of the morning in Switzerland. His family are shocked and devastated, according to his daughter, Maureen Haggis, to whom I spoke a couple of hours ago. And they have asked for their privacy to be respected at this difficult time. Lester Piggott has died aged 86, and we'll be spending much of the next 2.5 hours of this programme reflecting on what has been quite an extraordinary life in and out of the saddle. Jockey Neil Callan and trainer David Menuisier are my guests on Luck on Sunday this morning. Neil, this is far from the way we expected to open up today's programme, a man who leaves a quite remarkable legacy and impact on the sport.
Yeah, it's look, you know, it's obviously very sad to have it so quickly. When yesterday we always thought he was improving, so it was in the media. But yeah, look, it hits everybody in different ways. But me as a jockey, you know, when we were young, when everybody says, oh, you're going to be a jockey, like, who would you aspire to be? It's always Lester. So yeah, look, you know, it's very difficult to soak it up, but you know, I suppose at the same time then you've got to celebrate how good a jockey he was. So he was way ahead of his generation, and one of the best I think we'll ever see.
We'll be hearing very shortly from Brough Scott, who chronicled his career and worked with him very closely at the Evening Standard many years ago. We'll also be hearing from Willie Carson, from Bruce Raymond later in the programme, who was a contemporary of Lester's, and Peter Chappell-Hyam, who trained Rodrigo de Triano, Lester's final classic winner, his 30th classic winner, 9 derbies, a man who started race riding, David Menuisier, at the age of 12 years. Extraordinary man.
It's absolutely unbelievable, and I don't think we'll see another one anytime soon, anyone of his calibre.
And I'm interested from your perspective, as somebody you're growing up in France, the extent to which his legend reached beyond these borders.
Yeah, of course. I mean, and obviously he was from a generation before my generation, but yeah, look, that's how much of an impact he's had on racing worldwide. You know, when they are not from your generation, they belong to history with a capital H.
And Neil, you touched on it there. It had been known for some time that Lester had been quite unwell, 86 years old, but you know, there was a tangible sense of shock, because for all somebody's not been very well, you feel with a man of his standing that he's sort of going to be there forever.
Well, when you talk about legends, you know, people that you look up to like these in whatever sport or whatever way of life you are, you know, you always kind of believe that people like Lester are invincible. You know, they're going to be around forever, like you say. So, you know, look, everybody's going to die at some stage. So, you know, you don't really think about it until it's something like this has happened. And look, you know, 86, he's got to a great age. You know, considering, you know, in his era as a jockey, there wasn't the science or the expertise that we jockeys have nowadays. And, you know, in those days they probably abused their bodies. So it's probably, you know, to someone like him to get to that sort of age is pretty amazing. And look, like I say, you know, somebody like him, it is a very sad day. It's probably the saddest day in racing history. But, you know, we've got to celebrate him too, you know. He was an icon.
And David, you were supposed to have a runner in the Derby this week.
Mm-hmm.
This was your hope, your dream.
Yep.
The excitement must have been so great, and then the disappointment equally so when the horse couldn't run. You just had that little taste of what it might be to be involved in this race. Here's a guy who won it 9 times.
I know, it's absolutely exceptional. It's exceptional to have a runner. So to have a winner is even more exceptional, and having 9 of them is absolutely it's for us small people. It's very hard to imagine. Yeah.
And Neil, you're someone who's experienced the cut and thrust of race riding around the world, and you spent so much time in Hong Kong, where no quarter was asked or given. It strikes me that here was a man who really changed the way that riders operated. That he was a ruthless competitor as well as a brilliant sportsman. Yeah,
like I say, in that sort of era, like, he was so far ahead of his time, and I think that's probably why he was the best. He just had it. He just had everything, And yeah, look, in Hong Kong, it's even in England now. I've noticed since I've come back, it's dog eat dog, kind of way. But he revolutionised, I think, the way racing sports people and jockeys, how they operated. Like, what they're doing now is what he was doing then. So he was just so way ahead of his time.
And of course, the comeback, I think, is one of the most critical parts of the story, isn't it? Here is someone who came back to the saddle well into his 50s, and but weeks later won a Breeders' Cup race on Royal Academy.
Well, it just goes to show you how good he was. Most jockeys, when you spend a month out, whether you're injured or whether you take the winter off and you come back riding, it normally takes you about a week to kind of get your feeling back. It's like riding a bike. You never forget how to ride, but I mean, like, the tempo and the race riding, like, you've got to make decisions at split second. To be able to come back at that sort of level on the biggest stage of the Breeders' Cup and win a Breeders' Cup mile on Royal Academy was just, and the ride he gave it, like, unbelievable.
Yeah, an extraordinary man, an extraordinary life. If you're just tuning in, you are watching Luck on Sunday with the news that Lester Piggott has died at the age of 86, peacefully in the early hours of this morning in Switzerland. His daughter, Maureen Haggis, contacted us this morning to say the family was shocked and devastated. They would hope that their request for privacy was respected in the short term. Bruff Scott joins us now from his home. Bruff, a very sad morning. We knew that Lester had been unwell, but still, there is something that is very hard to come to terms with for anyone who's been a fan of this sport for any length of time.
Yeah, he cast the longest shadow anyone's ever cast over racing, and for me, he was my first and greatest hero, because I was 5 when he rode his first win at age 12. So I was 8 when he first rode in the Derby at 15, and then won the Eclipse that year. I was second in the King George. I was 11 when he won the Derby. Remember, I'd Never Say Die, and then got banned at Ascot and was made to go back to work in a yard. Today's young prodigies see nothing. And then he got the job while he's having to work in the yard as first jockey to the top trainer Noel Merlis. He was quite incredible. He danced to a different tune than any jockey before or since. You can argue about people's relative merits, but there never has been and there never will be anyone like Lester Piggott.
Bruff, I want to ask you about your own memories, because they're clearly so vivid. Your own memories of Lester winning that first Derby as a teenager, and the sensation that was countrywide because of the prestige and standing of the Derby at that time in the early 1950s. Here was a teenage riding sensation. What kind of impact did that have?
Well, by the time he won the Derby, it was sort of, how hadn't he won it before? And he's only 18. remember he first rode it when he was 15. I can remember because I was just about reading, wasn't I, at 5. I remember the headlines when he won his first race, aged 12. And then he was a little round-cheeked boy, looked rather sweet. And he was a sensation then. He at 15, he rode Zucchero in the Derby, who no one else could make start. And then he rode to be second in the King George, the first King George. He was then second in the Derby when he was 16 on a horse called Gay Time, and objected afterwards and wanted to object, and they had to stop him. So he was and I remember him telling me this because a lot of the jockeys, the Gordon Richards of this world, they'd been top jockeys before the war. So they were quite old men. There was this young kid, and he was Keith Piggott's son. He was a very tough jump jockey. His grandfather, never forget, Ernie Piggott, won 2 Grand Nationals, one at Gatwick and one at Aintree, and rode for the Tsar as well. But Leicester at 18, it was inevitable. And he rode also he was an outsider, which was a surprise, and it was a 20-1 or something. It was called Never Say Die. So it was absolutely the headline, absolutely the headline.
And we're having a look now at Never Say Die winning the 1954 Derby. And
Neil ought to have a look at Leicester's leg. He was riding jumping legs, or quite long for jumping now. But he could do anything on the horse. But you see, look at, and again, when he was riding these early days, there were no crash helmets like now. They just sort of lid, which would come off, and no goggles either. I asked him what it was like riding the November handicap at Manchester when it was covered in mud and 30 runners. He said you just had to shut your eyes. But the impact of him was extraordinary. He was from very, very early on, early teenager, he was that greatest of sporting compliments, indeed national compliments. He was just known by his first name, Leicester. You know, everyone knew there was only one Leicester. And who do you think you are, Leicester Piggott, was one of those things that people would say. And when I was riding, every lad would talk about Leicester Piggott and aim to be looked like Leicester Piggott. And of course, he ruined a whole generation of young jockeys because they tried to imitate the inimitable, because he was tall for a jockey, and then he rode very short, and they tried to imitate him, and the real genius was in his head, not in actually his mechanics. But he was. I've been close to quite a lot of different sorts of people, but he is the only person I've known quite well who, if the definition of genius is not just to do the things that other people aspire to, but to do the things that other people couldn't even dream of. Well, what he could do on a racehorse, Leicester Piggott, he was a genius.
Bruff, when do you believe, having followed his career so closely and been intertwined with it, when do you believe that he was at his absolute best, strongest? What was his pomp?
1970, I would say. Nijinsky was his pomp, and it was the ultimate alliance with Vincent O'Brien. If Nijinsky had won the Arc and retired, he would be unquestionably seen as the greatest horse ever, because he was much more majestic than anything else. And of course, he was Leicester Piggott too, Vincent O'Brien. The first time he had to give him a crack here, he pulls him out Gier. You'll see he turns the whip over once, and once he did that, see, he comes coasting past, and that horse beat Gier. And he was, at that stage, don't forget, he'd left the top trainer in Britain to go to Vincent O'Brien, and that was seen as incredibly bold and revolutionary. And at this time of year, if there wasn't a definite O'Brien runner or something, if they hadn't made up their mind, what will Leicester ride was the big talking point. And unlike now, the newspapers would carry it all the time. But in the 70s, with the early 70s, he was magnificent, and he could do he could do the two extremes of jockeys. I remember him winning the July Cup on a horse called Saritama, which was, and I'm standing by the 100 yards from the finish, and he was a sprinter, but he needed driving, and Leicester was head down, really driving, whip cracking, but really wanted someone to really lift a colt and drive it. You'd have Leicester. On the other hand, right back to Park Top and actually Petit Etoile, you had a filly that you had to just coax with your sort of fingertips. No one could do it better than Leicester. He could roll a horse under him like no one else has ever done before. He could roll them because he understood their heads better than anyone else. He was at his pomp when he was strong and healthy, and he got his weight under control. And of course, he then visited O'Brien, and everybody wanted him, and so he could do what he liked. And that, in the end, was his other downfall. And he's got his great redemption was to come back and win the Breeders' Cup and everything else.
I'll come to that in a moment, Bruff, because it's just the most extraterrestrial story in its own right, really. But I wanted to ask you, as someone who was anchoring television coverage through much of the 1970s and 80s, whether you believe that Lester Piggott really was the first jockey for the modern television age, really, the first jockey superstar for the modern television age, the golden age, I suppose, of TV.
Well, he again, Leicester, he used to make you laugh a lot, and so on this sad day, you have to remember the funny bits too. It's very important, I think. I know his family would like that, but I mean, he was made for television as regards visuals. I have to tell you, he wasn't made for television for audios. I mean, Blood Out of a Stone was quite simple compared to TV interviews with Lester Piggott to some extent. I mean, and don't forget, he always had a hearing impediment, which he could switch on slightly, became worse when he needed it. And his speech wasn't great. So speech on television was difficult. And I'll tell you a story, because it's coming into Derby week. I mean, inevitably you had to have, I didn't try and not bother him, but on Derby Day, you must come on, Lester. Oh, yeah, I'll come on. He used to mutter, don't forget. And so he agreed he was going to come on this, whichever Derby it was. The days when Derby was on a Wednesday and it was a huge deal and everything else. He agrees to come on, and I've got Charlie Fawkes, who's still with us, chasing him. So he's coming on. He's going to come. And they're getting, in my ears, you know, the hurry up. We're just about to start. We're going to have to go live. And when we get him down by the winning post, seems a good idea at the time. And I ask him a question, the opening question, what's it like to be here again, all that stuff that you do so well, Nick. Much better than I ever used to. But I asked him the question, and as he went to answer, and he tried pretty hard, the band, which I hadn't realized was behind us, started up. If ever there was an unequal struggle, it was me I must have put that microphone right down his throat, try and hear the words that he was actually saying. But no, he didn't used to say much, but he made a, I think the right word is, he had a sort of Brando-esque deal. He realized that he could use the speech impediment to his advantage. And if the phone rang and you answered it and there was silence, it'd be Lester. And in normal phone conversation, you say, hello, Nick, or hello, Bruff, and I say, hello, Nick, and you meet in the middle. With Lester, you'd say, hello, and you've already moved right over to his side of the fence before he says anything. And then you have to make your sort of speech, and then he sort of mutters yes or no. And he used that dry words that so he didn't say very much, but he could hit the right buttons. And people remembered, because you can remember he only used to say 2 or 3 things. I mean, I remember him this time of year in the beginning of May, when what will Leicester ride, and everyone's panicking, and I was talking to him about it, and he just muttered, it'll work out, it usually does, and he'd end up on the favourite. He was much the biggest star in our firmament.
Yeah, it's that it's that star quality at a particular time of the popularity of the sport as well, that you just feel that his life and career resonated like nobody's really could now outside the sport. And of course, what then happened later in life and his just ridiculously improbable comeback, only served to emphasise that. But I want to take you back to that period, late 80s, into his comeback at 1990, and just for you as a journalist, broadcaster following the sport at the time, just give us an indication as to just how extraordinary that was.
Well, the first thing you have to remember that he went to jail for the tax stock fraud, because he couldn't get it that actually he'd always before been able to sort of ride his way out of trouble, duck and dive, and in the revenue you can't do that to it. And I remember walking down the Rolling Mile with him a week before the trial, and him saying to me, rather so sadly, and I can't see the point of them locking me up. And I remember, they'd been through all the hoops lots of times, and he just couldn't really get it. But he did the year in jail, and it was jolly tough for him. And then afterwards, it was very, very tough for him trying to reboot. And I remember being rung up when he was by a friend of his. Something had happened, and he was quite worried that Leicester's actual hold it together. And actually, the comeback, Visitor Brown, so why don't you come and ride something for me? In a sort of charity race. And even though he was 55 or whatever it was, he came back. But then, he'd had an enormous career. He'd been this biggest ever figure, and not only retired, but gone to jail. And then suddenly he's going to come back. He comes back, he rides at Nottingham, I think it was. And then we did it live. We are at Belmont, which of course is within a time frame, as you know, for the Breeders' Cup, when he rides for Vincent O'Brien on Royal,
Academy.
Royal Academy. And it was a cold day, and I'll tell you this story because, it couldn't happen. And he dropped him in last, and obviously people like me had watched him. Well, I'd watched him since I was conscious, really, because I was aware when he was 12, and I've been aware ever since. And he dropped him out last, and then he spun him out. Remember, he only won a neck, I think, but he pulled him out. He was always going to win. You just sort of saw him reeling them in somehow. And then he picked the stick up and gave him about 3. And I promise you, as he went over the line, the hair stood up on the back of my neck, because this couldn't happen. He was retired, he was gone, he was a person of my very childhood. And here he was coming back. Look, he hasn't won it yet, but he was always going to win it, and he wins it. He had gone past the line. I just couldn't believe it. And then he came back in, and I remember it was a sort of tumult down by the rail where our TV spot was, and they pulled him towards us, and it was a dark day, darkish afternoon, and they had lights on him, and I could see his teeth. I could see the mud on his teeth, but his teeth were showing because he had a big smile, and he came towards us, and you say, "Well done," whatever. And I think made a couple of remarks, but then I had to sort of ask that basic question. Look, it's all very well, but you are 97 years old and you have been away and everything else. How on earth do you do it? And he said, it's a wet old day. He said this wonderful line. He said, "Oh no," he said, "you never forget." And one of the few intelligent things I've ever done on television was to shut up and just let that line linger and didn't say any more. You never forget, and we'll never forget him.
Bruff, thank you very much. A sad day indeed. Thank you for your recollections of Lester Piggott. We'll catch up, no doubt, very soon.
Thank you. Good luck, everyone.
Bruff's got there. Memories of an amazing day at Belmont Park, Neil Callan, and before that, such a glorious career. But if it's one of those days, isn't it? If people ask you, if you could go back to any one of these and enjoy it, God, I'd love to have been there in 1990.
I'd like to have been in his era, watching him ride, or to ride against him. Look, he's just exceptional, and Bruff summarised for a long period of time about him. But to put it in a nutshell, there's only, in any sport, there's always one, and it's just because they're naturally gifted. He was just naturally gifted, and they just, you know, you can work hard to improve your ability or to get better at something or to, you know, try and imitate somebody. But people like Lester, when you just have something, you just have it, and it comes naturally. And
I was struck there, David, by what Bruff said, that he almost ruined a whole generation of jockeys because they all tried to copy him, and you couldn't copy him.
No, you couldn't. And what's amazing watching the replays is the confidence. He knows, you know, he gets on the horse and he knows exactly what the horse is like and what he should do and where the finish line is. And he never panics, you know. It's just beautiful to watch because it's like it's all planned, and boom, he's there on the line. It's magical to watch, really.
And it has. Yeah, the interesting thing for me, Neil, is how few jockeys of a previous era, how they stand the test of time. When you watch those races now, whether you think, oh well, everything looks better now. In most sports, doesn't it? Everything looks better now than it did 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. Not necessarily so in this case.
no, like, I mean, like, I'll go back to before, like the sciences and the technology and then the preparation and everything, like the amount of, you know, like you have nutritionists now and you have like people that train you up and conditioning and everything, you know. And in those days, you didn't have that, you know. So, but to look at him, when you look back at his videos or whatever, you'd actually, if it wasn't in black and white half of it, you'd be thinking like he's a new age jockey. He was so far ahead of them, you know. And my son, he's 15 now, Jack, and he wants to be a jockey. And last year sometime, I bought Lester's book and I gave it to him. And I said, this is what you want to be. This is who you want to be like. So he, his, you know, this is what I'm saying, like people in the future, in the past, wherever, they're always going to be aspire to him. So like the legend lives on, as I say.
Let's talk to another legend of that era, Willie Carson, who joins me now. Willie, good morning. Lester Piggott has died at the age of 86. It's something, in a strange sort of way, you never thought you'd say or hear. Just tell me your thoughts today.
Well, good morning, everyone. A sad day. Iconic Lester has passed away. And I'm sitting here after hearing the news and thinking somebody's taken an arm off me, because he's been basically part of my life ever since I got into racing. I started with Gerard Armstrong, who was the family whom Lester married. And then I went to Sam Armstrong, who was his father-in-law. And of course I would work with him at a very early age. And of course, when you're an apprentice and you're riding work with this, well, he wasn't quite a legend in those days, but he was very good, and he had an aura about him. He just seemed to know what he was doing. He didn't care about what anybody else thought of him. He just got on and did what he thought was right. And of course, as things have turned out, we know that he had this mental attitude. He knew what the horse was thinking, and he was able to do it on the racecourse. He never seemed to make too many mistakes. He always seemed to ride the horse the right way. But, obviously jockeys do make mistakes, but this guy made less mistakes than most.
I was thinking about some of those great sportsmen and tributes that get paid to them, and quite often you hear words like aura that you've used, force of personality, the extent to which just by being Lester Piggott he could put his rivals on the back foot. Is that something you recognise?
Oh yes. When you were in his presence, you felt the aura, because his quietness. He didn't say anything, but he just had this aura about him. And when he went out on the racecourse, he was always winning. And basically, we jockeys, we had to up our game to try and beat him. But I would suggest that Pat Edry, myself, Bruce Raymond, we all improved as jockeys because of Lester Piggott. We had to, because he was such a good fellow on a horse. He just seemed to have this calmness, and he just sat there and later in life when he got his irons very short, and he just pivoted on top of a horse. His balance was fantastic, and then of course his strength in the finish. He basically in those days was just like Beckham is today. He couldn't walk down the street, without people stopping for autographs, and he was a phenomenon, and we all appreciated that. Not all the time, of course, because we had to compete with him, and we had to improve. He was a quiet person, ruthless, absolutely ruthless, but he got the job done, and he was different. He wasn't like anybody else. He just got on with his. He was in a cocoon himself, and he kept doing that. He was, it was magical actually to watch. When I look back on it, you would say he was just a genius, absolutely a genius on a horse. He always seemed to get into the horse's head. He knew how to ride them, and also, he would ride a lot of work and find out about his opponents, and he knew how to beat them. So he was a difficult man to beat in a race, and the word genius is possibly, it's there, and that was Lester Piggott, the genius on a horse.
I've got to ask you, Willie, about 1977, and
I thought you might.
It's the race that defines, in a sense, your rivalry with him, or perhaps the way you were feeling at that time. You were at the absolute peak of your powers and going to win the Derby on Hot Grove, and here comes Lester Piggott on the Minstrel. Just take me back to that day, how you felt through the final stages of that race and then immediately afterwards.
Well, I remember Lester had won on this horse, and he didn't want him. And, of course, I got the ride, and he was riding the Minstrel, who obviously was a Vincent O'Brien, another dancer horse. And coming into the last furlong, I thought, I had kicked, you see, my horse was a stayer. There was only 4 horses in the whole Derby that year when there was 4. They could stay at the mile and a half really well, so I kicked very early. I actually kicked to get my horse his stamina to get him to show his best form. And of course here comes this white-faced bloody horse, the Minstrel, and we had a ding-dong. We go in jail now with the sticks nowadays. Unfortunately, my horse never won another race, I don't think, and the Minstrel went on and won about 3 other Group 1 races after this. It woke him up. The third horse was well beaten, Blushing Groom, didn't stay, and of course it was a ding-dong finish. And the funny side of Lester, he's got a funny side to him, he's human. And years later, he said to me, I'll do it in his voice, yeah, you made it hard for me, didn't you?
which is
because
about,
I kicked early.
which is about as great a compliment in a way as he could pay. I mean, would you say that was one of your best Derby rides?
Oh no.
No.
No. I don't like watching that actually, but the horse, I got the best out of my horse.
That's what I mean.
He was riding the champion, I was riding basically a hurdler. But no, I'll go back to Troy for that. But anyway, Leicester was, well, as I said earlier, he made us better jockeys because he was so good. And when he was in the race, you would be thinking about him. What's he going to do? How can I beat him? Made your brain work. He was, he's always in your mind. You go to bed and you sleep. You have nearly nightmares about him. That's how good he was. And the man never said anything. He just did a few grunts. But he did, his actions, his riding spoke. And you can see by his record, 9 derbies. A few of them, of course, he waited for the last week and got on the best horse, but that's beside the point. He rode 9 derbies. That is unbelievable. Every jockey who rides is lucky to ride 1, but he rode 9. It's a record, possibly, that will never be broken. And I'm sure there's other records that Leicester have done will be hard to beat. I'm feeling quite sad in a way because that man has been part. I'm getting a bit emotional now. That man has been part of my life for a long time, and I'm sorry that he's passed away. I know that age gets you. Maybe it's because I'm thinking it's going to be me next. There's not many of our generation left. Jimmy, Joe, Pat's gone. Bruce Wayman, he's still with us. They tried to get him and they couldn't get him. It was a great generation, the Piggott generation. That's what we're going to call it. And he did things that other jockeys could never, ever do. He was just magic, absolutely magic. But a terrible opponent, because we could never beat the long fella. Yeah.
Willie, I appreciate your time very much this morning. Was very sorry to have to impart the news to you earlier on. Thanks for speaking so beautifully about someone who was such an important part of your life, and we'll see you very soon.
Okay, thanks.
Willie Carson. You get that sense of real depth of camaraderie is the wrong word, but real depth of companionship, I suppose. Somebody who was just a part of his life for so long.
Yeah, I'd say it's more like a respect.
So a real depth
to how good he was. And that just goes to show you that, they're sportsmen, they're jockeys, professionals. And like Willie's, shown compassion towards someone that he, was trying to be for so many years. So it just goes to show you that how touching he is, or how he touches people, competitors, friends, family, whoever. Even to the normal people down the street, in that era, watching him on TV, it just goes to show you, he wasn't, obviously he was a top class jockey, but when they touch you beyond that, then you just show how much respect that you had for someone like him.
And all those memories come flooding back. I mean, Brough Scott talks about Lester Piggott in his pomp in 1970. We've just seen the Minstrel there in 1977, winning the Derby as a teenager in the early 1950s. But his final classic, his 30th classic, came well into his 6th decade, well into his 50s. Part of his comeback, 1992, Rodrigo de Triano won the 2,000 guineas, trained by one of the youngest trainers in the country at the time, Peter Chappell-Hyam, for Robert Sangster. Peter's on the line now. Morning, Peter. Are you there? Have we got Peter Chapelheim?
Sorry, I couldn't hear you. Sorry.
Not at all, Peter. Good to have you with us, because this is a very important chapter of the Leicester Piggott story as well. And I know him riding for you in those Robert Sangster silks, as you were telling me a few weeks ago, was by no means a foregone conclusion. But sort of how did you feel at the time to sort of be part of this legend, part of this story?
It was just unbelievable for a young man like myself to have Leicester Piggott riding for you. Like, he was my hero, he was everyone's hero. And everything went like clockwork. Leicester and the horse suited each other down to the ground.
And you were saying that even though Leicester had this incredible association with Robert Sangster that had gone back, decades, that Robert wasn't quite sure whether this was the right call.
No, he wasn't. No, he said basically said to me, it's up to you at the end of the day. But his words were, on your head be it. And then I kept pestering, and in the end he said, rightio, get the old man. And that was it.
Get the old man, and the old man delivered. And
yeah.
Willie Carson there was talking about the confidence that he carried around with him. And
he was just, he had like an awe about him all the time, around him. And I remember working before the Juddmonte, when we'd had time off and brought him back, and I galloped him and left the road, and he pulled up, and the first words he said to me was, if you had him this right for the Derby, I wouldn't come off the bridle. And then, it was just Leicester.
And we're just having a look at the closing stages of the Guineas now, and
yeah,
coming out of the Greenham, you couldn't have had quite the same assuredness that he did that this was going to happen on Guineas Day, could you?
Not really, no. Because obviously it was only 2 weeks between the Greenham and the Guineas, so I couldn't do that much with him. But I did give him one gallop, and Rory O'Dowd, who looked after him, Rory rode him, and he did work superbly well. And when you're young, you're brash. And I did get the feeling that we were back in the right place. Because after the Greenham, Willie used to ride him, you see, Carson. And Willie said to me that I don't think he's trained on, basically. And I thought, oh, God. But I knew in my heart of hearts that surely he had.
Peter, I've been talking quite a bit this morning about the impact of Leicester Piggott, the impact he had on all generations. When you were growing up as a racing fan, tell me about your feelings towards him, about what sort of impression he left on you.
Well, there are very few people in racing who are known by their first name. Frankie, Leicester, probably Henry. And that's by the general public, not just us people who think it's a huge world in our business. And you mention Leicester's name, everyone knows Leicester. Everyone has got a story to tell about Leicester, whether they backed him in the 5 o'clock at somewhere, they bumped into him, or whatever. He was worldwidely known, if you know what I mean. And I remember being on a school trip, and I was a school bookmaker. And when the Minstrel beat Hotgrove, and I lost quite a bit of money that day, because everyone backed Leicester, and I'd backed Hotgrove. So that was my first, really, I think, dividing memory, was Leicester on the Minstrel, which was an unbelievable ride.
Yeah.
And then people saying, oh, he was too hard on him, this and that. Well, the Minstrel, he won the King George. He was an unbelievable racehorse. And Leicester was the perfect jockey.
It's a sad day for sure,
It
but
certainly is.
But a day to celebrate a complete one-off.
Yeah. Long live the king. The king is dead. Basically, I don't need to say it, but everyone else says it, sort of thing. And he was, and he is, the greatest jockey we ever had.
Peter, thanks so much.
No problems whatsoever. It's a pleasure.
Peter Chapelheim, the man who trained Rodrigo de Triana. I want to talk to you, David Menuisier, from a trainer's perspective, really, about how much of a difference a jockey can really make, because it's a widely debated topic, isn't it?
No, but what's really striking when you watch the videos is his confidence, but his confidence will bring confidence all around him as well. So if you book a jockey of his caliber, you are serene yourself. So it will give the horse a chance, because you will do everything in such a with a positive vibe, that the horse will thrive as well. He's going to make his horse feeling, he's making directly and indirectly the horse feeling great and possibly better than he is. And watching those videos, I'm actually, because I'm fairly young, and I haven't watched that many races that he rode. And the few videos we watched this morning, I'm actually flabbergasted by the. I don't mean to be controversial, but he doesn't even look that tidy on a racehorse. But he just makes them travel so great that they just run for him. Jockeys nowadays are much more stylish than he was, in my opinion, anyway. I don't want to be. But horses just run for him. They just travel very strongly, and I think it's the confidence that he brings to the entourage, as well as being a fantastic jockey. And also, as Willie mentioned earlier, the fact that all other jockeys try and come to his level. So obviously somebody like him will bring the whole industry forward.
Everybody has talked about this man's aura and the way that he had an almost magical effect on horses, but also how he could intimidate his competition, and how few people really are household names in this sport. Leicester was one in an era when the sport was at the peak of its popularity. A man who has had an incredibly long and distinguished career, and a career that overlapped with Leicester's, is Frankie Dettori, who joins me now. Frankie, good morning.
Good morning, guys.
A sad day. We knew Leicester had been unwell, but as I've said already through the last hour, there still seems something not quite real about saying he's no longer with us. You, I know, have some very, very fond memories of Leicester.
Yeah, listen, I've been very close with Maureen and his son Jamie about his health this last few weeks. So, when actually Maureen gave me a phone call, I knew it was bad news. I lived in Italy, so when I came to this country, I was not afraid of Leicester like all the other jockeys were. So I had quite a very friendly relationship, because I took him as a normal person, and we had some great banters together. Actually, when I started riding, he already retired, so I rode him when he was a trainer, and I lost my claim on his horses. And then when he made a comeback, I rode with him as a jockey. So we had a very communal friends together, Barney Curley, so I got to know him quite well. And I saw a different side of Leicester compared to others. I've seen a very dry sense of humor, a person that he laughed and smiled, and I really enjoyed his company. And look, it goes without saying, he's the best he's ever lived as a jockey. And but I more attached to him on a personal side than on what he's achieved in racing. And he is a big loss. I've lost a friend, and what else can you say? Like you said, as soon as you mention his name, Leicester, then you don't have to say anything else.
It's interesting you say that you will remember him very fondly as a person, because and as Bruff has touched on, as Willie's touched on, he was enigmatic. There were so few people who really knew who he was. Give me an idea of Lester Piggott, the man.
Well, he actually was very thoughtful, and I was asking for advice and stuff like that. He was you know, and also he had a good sense of humor. I used to absolutely rip him to shreds when he came back, and I told him how old he was, and I told him one day I'm going to stuff in the museum, jokingly. And then, I mean, he took it all in, and then one day, got in the Goodwood in a big field race, he reached over and grabbed my crown jewels from behind and gave it a good squeeze. And that's typical him. And I remember we crossed the line and said, "Hey, what are you doing?" And he said, "Well, I'll teach you a lesson for being cheeky." So he had that kind of sense of humor as well, what the people didn't see. He wasn't just a mean and a ruthless person. He also had a good dry sense of humor. And yeah, that's the way I would like to remember him.
And you were by his side when the statue of Lester was unveiled as well. That must have been quite a special moment for you.
Yeah, obviously, of course, very special, and yeah, he was one of my heroes, and you know, I'm one of the lucky ones, and I did ride with him. You know, I was in the race when he won the Royal Academy, and you know, I've never seen anything like it in my life. What the man could do, it was amazing.
I must confess, I'd completely forgotten that you were in that race back at Belmont Park in 1990. What were you riding? Mark of Distinction?
I was riding Mark of Distinction. Yeah, I mean, I never seen anything like it. A person of his age, a month from retirement after being out of the saddle for 5 years, and he does something like that. It just shows you, you know, what the legend is.
What was the atmosphere like back in the jockeys' room afterwards with all the sort of international superstars?
I think a sense of shock. I mean, it was surreal, you know. And he just like was water off duck's back, you know. Just walked around like, oh, this is normal. I mean, it's not normal. I mean, we all kind of gobsmacked, but he just took it in his stride and strolled in like nothing happened. It's just amazing.
It's funny, isn't it? Because you're quite a cool customer. You've won a lot of big races. You've won more Group 1 races than anybody else. But I've seen you on a race day, and you go into a zone, and it's quite obvious you're in that zone. It strikes me, talking to people about Lester, that you'd never really know exactly what he was thinking, and that was part of his genius.
I mean, I only saw him the last 2 or 3 years when he was in his late 50s riding. You know, and he still had that magical touch. Imagine what it was like when he's in his 30s, but I never got to experience that. But, you know, what I saw in a grand old age of 56 or 57, what he was doing, it was just, you know, he was 20 or 30 years above everybody else in my sport, you know. And you get, there's only a few people in sports that you can mention. For example, Tiger Woods, and he was 20 years in front of everybody else. And Lester, he was the same, you know. He's, you know, it was, you know, what I saw with my own eyes, it was already remarkable. But just, you know, I wish I saw him when, well, maybe I didn't wish it. I don't with him when he was in his 30s. But it was just an incredible jockey.
And the fact that Lester has died just 6 days before this year's Derby, a race that he had this extraordinary, mesmeric stranglehold over. He will be uppermost in our minds next weekend. Frankie, when you canter down to the start on Pisbadil next Saturday, I've no doubt Lester will be in your thoughts. Yeah,
absolutely. Listen, I did send him a video message a couple of days ago, and Jamie showed it to him, and he said that made him smile. So I just want to think of that.
Frankie, thanks so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Frankie Dettori with his recollections of riding with Lester Piggott. And this was Golden Horns Derby, 2015. Lester so enjoyed Derby Day each and every year, meeting all the riders. The absolute master of the Downs on 9 winners spanning several decades. If you've just joined us here on Luck on Sunday, we're paying tribute to the life and career of the one and only Lester Piggott, who has died aged 86. He died in Switzerland in the early hours of this morning, peacefully. Many of his family on their way to see him now. We will be right back in a few moments' time.
Luck on Sunday, proudly sponsored by Albasti Equiworld Dubai. As a member of Racing TV, you get access to dedicated live racecourse feeds through Racing TV Extra. All you need to do is log in with your Racing TV username and password. Racing TV Extra puts you in control, so you can focus on the races or meetings that matter to you. If watching on a desktop, tablet or Apple TV, you can select from 1 to 4 live screens. On mobile phones and Amazon Fire TV, single screen options are available. Never miss a moment of action with Racing TV Extra at racingtv.com.
And they're off for the Kazoo Derby.
The Tory is clear in the Derby for authorised 5 or 6 lengths. He's had to wait 15 years. Authorised will give Frankie the Tory his first Derby. It is Camelot who leads by 3 or 4 lengths from Astrology. The father and son combination of Joseph and Aidan O'Brien won the Investec Derby with Camelot. Golden Horn looks like putting it to bed, and it is Golden Horn driven out, remains unbeaten. Golden Horn won the Derby.
Alan Kirby for a first classic success, and O'Dale is pouring on and striding clear to win the Kazoo Derby.
Luck on Sunday, proudly sponsored by Albasti Equiworld Dubai.
Welcome back. You're watching Luck on Sunday. News this morning broke that Lester Piggott, the greatest jockey of his generation, one of the most famous faces ever in the sport of horse racing, had died at the age of 86. Through so many decades, he enthralled and mesmerised the racing public. He was known far beyond the confines of this sport. He was quite brilliant on Epsom Downs, and we're going to take you back now to 1983 and his victory on Tinoso.
1.5 miles, that's it, 12 furlong the trip. Holmbury the one nearest to us, smartly into his stride. Holmbury disputing the early running in the early stages from Gordian in second place. Then just in behind these comes Nar, and up on the outside Sloopy going very well on the very wide outside with Naorian. And it's Sloopy on the extreme left of the picture who leads the overall field from Naorian, Morcon up there, Tinoso not too far away. And as they continue their uphill journey, very, very closely grouped indeed, with Sloopy now being headed by Naorian, and it's Naorian in the lead from Sloopy in second place. Then just in behind these comes Nar, then Lester Piggott on Tinoso in a prominent position. The back marker is Lomond down by a little way, but it's now Mittalini that has come through to take up the running. Go to the hill on the far side, and it's Mittalini, Sloopy on the outside. Then just in with these comes Tinoso going very well. Behind these Naorian, then Guns of Navarone, Holmbury, Lomond is the back marker, Yarwar is towards the rear, so too is Zoffany. And as they continue their uphill climb to the point 7 furlongs from home, it's Mittalini in the lead from Lester Piggott on Tinoso in second place, then Sloopy on the outside of Gordian, then just in behind these comes Carlingford Castle, and it's Mittalini in the lead from Tinoso in second place. Then just in behind these comes Tivian, who's made up ground. Then comes on the outside Naorian. They begin the descent to Tattenham Corner. Mittalini from Tivian, Tinoso, then Zoffany next to the rails, Carlingford Castle on the outside. The American horse Sloopy is on the middle division. Wassell is trying to come with a run. And as they begin the turn into the home straight, come down to Tattenham Corner, it's Tivian and Mittalini who disputed from Tinoso in second place. Then just in behind these comes Gordian, and there's a faller at the rear of the field, and it's difficult to distinguish who it is at this stage. Mittalini in the lead from Tivian in second place, then comes Tinoso in third. These are followed by Naorian in fourth, turning into the home straight, and it's Salmon Leap, who's improving just in behind these, and it's Mizzolini from Tinoso, Leicester Piggott on Tinoso, committed and goes for home, and it's Tinoso, Leicester Piggott with 2.5 furlongs to go. Tinoso in the lead from Mizzolini in second place, then comes Naoria, Guns of Navarone is staying on, then comes Salmon Leap, but Leicester Piggott with 2.5 furlongs to go, is clear on Tinoso, 2 furlongs to go, and Tinoso clear from Guns of Navarone second, Carling for Carson is third, then comes Salmon Leap unbeaten but in fourth place, then Sheer Walk, 1.5 furlongs to go, and Leicester Piggott in the lead, Carling for Carson is chasing in second place, and well inside the final half furlong, Leicester Piggott coming home on his 9th Derby winner, Tinoso from Carling for Castle in second place, coming up towards the line, Tinoso's going to win it from Carling for Castle, Tinoso the winner, Carling for Castle second, a photo for third between Sheer Walk and Salmon Leap, then Guns of Navarone and Nar, then Pluralism and Morcon and Tolland has won.
Tinoso winning the Derby in 1983. Leicester Piggott riding yet another winner, 9th in the race, and Tinoso winning in very, very soft ground that year as well. We spoke to Frankie Dettori, Neil, a few moments ago, and he's been very much in the news recently, again picking up a good Derby ride at the 11th hour on Pisbadil as he did last year and the year before. That's the power of a name like that, but Leicester could do it literally the couple of days before. Swoop for the good ones.
Yeah, and Frankie's like one of the best jockeys of his era, you know. But yeah, like I mean, when you come to the big day, you look for the big jockeys, don't you? So when anything goes, not begging, but whenever something's, you know, when they're looking for somebody at the last minute, it's the top jockeys that pop into the trainers or the owner's head. So they're the ones that go looking for, and Frankie's the man at the moment.
He certainly is. David, you train how many horses?
About 60, 65.
60, 65 horses. Getting that regularity of a jockey on your horse, not that straightforward?
No, because I mean, obviously a lot of the top jockeys have retainers, so it's very hard to keep continuity, but I think continuity is very important.
When you go into a big race and you've got a guy that's been plugging away honestly for you, and then you've got the option of having somebody exceptional, what's your instinct always?
It's got to be a discussion, a concerted discussion, you know, with the owners as well, you know. But I think personally, I think if somebody knows the horse, I find it hard to drag them off.
And do you think it's with a case like Frankie and with Leicester before him? Do you think it's a case of it's only really a one-off, a once in a generation or a twice in a generation jockey that you really go to? Because you can't not. You couldn't leave Leicester Piggott sitting in the jockey's room. You couldn't. You see what I mean? I
see what you mean. Personally, I'd be a bit worried about karma, but if the regular jockey can't make it, then obviously you know you go to the best possible one available, and if it's a superstar, it's even better. But
tell you, with talk of karma, he should be training in Hong Kong, shouldn't he?
I don't know about that.
I'm not superstitious, but you always want to do the right things.
Okay, I'm pleased to say that, well, we are about to connect to Ballydoyle, to Aidan O'Brien, and you can't really talk about Leicester Piggott without talking about Ballydoyle and Aidan's predecessor, Dr. Vincent O'Brien. And if you're talking about Leicester Piggott as a generation shaper, someone who changed the sport, who developed that golden era of jockeys that Willie Carson was talking about, you know, Carson, Edery. He was talking a little about Bruce Raymond earlier. We're going to try and contact him in a little while. Swinburne. You know, the brilliant riders of the 70s and 80s that Piggott had this magical power over. If he reshaped the game as far as jockeyship was concerned, then there's no doubt Dr. Vincent O'Brien reshaped the game as far as training was concerned, laid the foundations for what we've seen at Ballydoyle for the last 25 years with Aidan O'Brien. And the game simply wouldn't be the game that it is today had neither Vincent O'Brien nor Leicester Piggott graced it, the two towering figures really of the 20th century in this sport, David.
Yeah, look, and obviously we talk about Lester because he sadly passed away today. But I think, Dr. O'Brien was the same in the training ranks, and as a consequence of their talent, now, the margins are much narrower between trainers, between the top and the smaller yards like myself.
That's interesting. Just flesh that out for me a little bit.
Because, because of technology and knowledge and what have you, I think, maybe 30, 40 years ago, there was a big gap between your top trainers and they tended to win everything. Now the smaller guys like us, I'm the best example of somebody I can talk about. We can have a part of the cake. When 30, 40 years ago, I don't think we would have been in competition with those big guys. Now we can.
So, I was reflecting on this yesterday when Rafe Beckett couldn't get his filly to France because of complications mainly to do with Brexit, really. They couldn't get his filly to France for the Prix Saint-Hilary today.
Yep.
And I'm thinking, you got Vincent O'Brien 60 years ago, flying horses from putting an airfield in an airstrip and flying horses from Ballydoyle to race around the world.
To America, yeah.
I mean, it's phenomenal.
Extraordinary, yeah.
The way in which he moved the sport forward. And then when you team him up with a rider like Lester Piggott and you have the resources of John Magner and Robert Sangster, you've almost got a can't-fail situation, haven't you?
Well, that's it, and they were so privileged to be able to use the best of everything. And now the best of everything is much more available to all than it was then, I think.
OK, if you are just tuning in, we brought you the news this morning of the death of Lester Piggott at the age of 86. Just the foremost figure in the sport of horse racing post-war. A little later in the programme, I'll be speaking to Sir Michael Stout, for whom Lester won the Irish Derby on the Great Shergar in 1981. He also won a 2,000 guineas for Sir Michael on Shadid. Sir Michael himself, of course, has the favourite for the Derby in 6 days' time in Desert Crown. And we're still just working on getting that contact and that connection with Ballydoyle. So we might just take a quick break now and come back. We'll try and connect with Aidan O'Brien.
Luck on Sunday, proudly sponsored by Al Basti Equiworld Dubai.
You are a member of our club, so make the most of your Racing TV membership with a range of exciting new options for your Racing TV Club Days. As well as your favourite club days every month of the year, members will now be able to take advantage of the new weekend ticket, with over 30 free weekend fixtures. That means you can access over 70 free fixtures in the UK and now in Ireland, worth over £3,500. New for 22 is the weekend ticket, giving more of you the opportunity to take advantage of a free day at the races. We still have our great club days, and there's the September season ticket at all of our Scottish tracks. It's easy to get your tickets. Just visit racingtv.com/club and choose your dates. You will then be emailed your ticket 5 days before the event. Bring along your Racing TV metal badge and you're ready to enjoy a day at the races. There's a full list of fixtures at racingtv.com/club. So be part of the biggest free racing club in the world with Racing TV Club Days.
From Gold Cups to Grand Nationals and Derbies to Desert Orchid. The latest big races to the famous clashes of the past. Racing TV's YouTube channel has it all, with thousands of great videos to be enjoyed right now. Watch memorable feature shows from Racing TV's back catalogue again. Catch up on episodes of popular shows that you might have missed when shown on the channel. Enjoy insight and tips, or just sit back and enjoy watching thrilling replays of some of your favourite races from the last 20 years. Simply head to YouTube, search for Racing TV and hit subscribe. With Racing TV on YouTube, you'll never be far away from watching another great race. At Racing TV, 100% of our profits go back into racing. Thank you for supporting the sport that we all know and love.
Luck on Sunday, proudly sponsored by Al Basti Equiworld Dubai.
Welcome back. We woke this morning to the very sad news of the death of simply the greatest, Lester Piggott, at the age of 86. He died in the early hours of this morning in Switzerland. His family say he died peacefully, many of them on their way now to pay their respects. They've asked for privacy over the next few days, quite understandably. His daughter Maureen described the family as shocked and devastated at the passing of one of the great towering figures of this sport. For many years he was inextricably associated with the Coolmore operation, with Dr. Vincent O'Brien. John and Sue Magner have sent a message this morning. They say, obviously a very sad day and so many stories and great memories for Sue and I. I remember meeting Lester in the parade ring before the 1971 Haydock Park Sprint Cup. A group of us had bought into Green God a couple of days before, and Lester was up for what was to be the horse's final race. Don't be looking for me at the furlong pole. I won't be there until the line, he told me. And sure enough, he produced him with his trademark impeccable timing. At this time of year, MV, Dr. O'Brien, was regularly frustrated by Lester playing musical chairs of what he would be riding in the Derby. But he said, you have to put up with him, otherwise you give the opposition a £7 advantage. He really was the greatest. His family are in our thoughts today. John and Sue Magner and all at Coolmore Stud. What a legacy he has left, and what a legacy at Coolmore and Ballydoyle he contributed to with Dr. O'Brien, as I was saying. I think we can connect to Ballydoyle now and say good morning to Aidan O'Brien. Aidan, good morning. Can you hear me?
Good morning, Nick. How are you?
Very well. Very sad news for us to wake up to today. You more than anyone, particularly given where you're sitting now, will just appreciate what Lester Piggott's place was in the horse racing world. Just share your thoughts with me, if you will.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like, obviously, he was a very special man. Nick, I used to come here when I came every year around classic times, and we'd go through all the horses, and he would give us his thoughts about them and what he thought where they should go and what his favourites were. And obviously it was something that I will never forget. His knowledge was second to none. I didn't say a lot, but every word he said, you really hung on to, because it always meant so much, and you knew there was so much experience in there, so much knowledge, and so much natural ability to assess a horse, I think. Listen, so we're just so sorry for, obviously, everybody that he has passed. But what a special man, and for us it was absolute privilege that we did know him and got to know him over the years.
Aidan, there are very few riders, very few jockeys who can have had such an intrinsic involvement in the development of such an important operation. When you first arrived at Ballydoyle, was the sort of presence of that era around you? Could you sort of feel that sort of the presence of the Dr. O'Brien, Piggott sort of axis there very much?
Oh yeah, no, absolutely, Nick. Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, Dr. O'Brien and Mr. O'Brien were living here when we came first, so it definitely was. And like I said, Leicester used to come every year and look and go through the classic courses. He would sit in the Jeep all morning for one day every year when the classics started. So very much so, and that presence is felt everywhere here. Like obviously Dr. O'Brien and Mr. O'Brien and Leicester, and it's all over the place. It's on all the walls, and it's in the stables. It's the plaques are on the walls of the horses, and obviously then with John and Sue and Coolmore as well. Like it's and obviously there's a big statue of Dr. O'Brien in Rose Green, and there's a big new statue of Leicester at the Curragh. So listen, it's going to be there forever, ever and ever, really.
When you were growing up and you were watching Leicester riding, did he have the same sort of impact in Ireland as he did in the UK? Did his impact transcend completely?
I think it did. Yeah, no, very much so. I remember when we started training, Leicester rode a filly for us called Farfetched, owned by Paul Shanahan's dad, Jimmy, and his brother, Tom. So it was such a big thing for Leicester to come over to the Curragh and to ride their filly. We have never, I suppose, never experienced any present or aura around any person like that before, really. Listen, he's just one of those very, very special people, really.
That must have been quite a feeling for you. I mean, how old were you at the time when he came over to ride for you?
Yeah, sure. We would have just started training, really, Nick. Really, but obviously we would have read and heard and saw all the things before that. But to be able to give him a leg up on one of our horses and for him to ride it in a race and then to come in and to feel the presence that he had, obviously Jimmy and Tom and I suppose the thrill and the buzz that they got out of that, and like every word that he would say was hung onto by everybody, and he didn't say many words, but when he did say them, they meant so much, really.
Oh, you were talking. I've got this sort of image now of him sitting in your Jeep alongside you, looking at classic horses in those early days. Would the odd thing just stick with you? Would it ever make you think, oh, I hadn't quite thought of that?
Oh no, always, yeah, absolutely. It was only a comment he would make ever, but you would always know that he would have put a lot of thought into it before he'd say it, and even before he would have came here. And obviously, I'd be talking to John and Sue about it, and then he usually go and have dinner with them after here. So it was always an awful lot thought of his opinion, and I suppose we when he wasn't riding that time, it was a very serious opinion. Obviously, when he was riding, he had to keep his own opinion a little bit to himself, because he was always wanting to ride the best horse and keeping everybody happy and all that. But when he came to us, like it meant so much, and like it always steered us on a road, whether to go Guineas or go Derby or go in Oaks or go wherever, with it. And like he was very, he had a great interest. Obviously, he read everything in the papers and he followed all the horses. But his opinion always meant so much, really.
Aidan, a great part of the Piggott legacy, the key part perhaps, is what he did for the Derby and how he rode around Epsom. As someone who's had prodigious success as a trainer around Epsom, do you still wonder at how he managed to ride 9 Derby winners?
Yeah, so I suppose you would and you could, but obviously when you saw the way he rode, like it wasn't different. I think he used to. Horse used to relax very well for him, but when he used to ask them to quicken, like they used to really take off with him. You know, he had a very unique, different style, and like he kind of really only barely touched them, and like he only used to stand up on their back. So I'd say horses used to feel like they were loose when he used to start to get behind them. You know, like he used to just barely stand on their backs, really. I'd say if you were a horse, like. You would love if Leicester was riding them, because it was nearly like a bird on your back, you know, like he was just barely on them. But they used to run with their heads out and down for him. So he had a obviously very unique style, a very special style, really.
If you win the Derby next weekend, you will emulate his feat by getting a 9th Derby winner. If he was still with us and in the Jeep with you at Ballydoyle, what do you think would be his assessment of your chances this year, and who do you think he would like the look of best?
Oh, gee, that's very tough question, Nick. But I he would have been watching the trials, obviously, and would have had a very strong opinion. I'm not really sure. I know that he always liked the horse with plenty of pace. I think that was one of his big things. How a horse travelled with him. He was always one of his very must-have things, I think, in a horse, and that's what I always got from him over the years. Like he always wanted a horse with speed, and he never worried about stamina too much. But I think speed is what he always kind of looked for in a horse.
I'm just looking down your list of Derby winners, starting with the great Galileo, High Chaparral, Camelot, Ruler of the World, Australia, Wings of Eagles, Anthony Van Dyke and Serpentine. It struck me from what you were saying there, all rather different horses, some with lots of pace and kick, and some with that bit more stamina. Who's your fastest Derby contender this year? Who's the one with the speed?
Oh, I suppose it's difficult, Nick. Obviously, Changing of the Guard is the horse that stays the best. He showed that. I suppose the horse that won the D Stakes, he's a lazy way of going, but he can pick up and quick. And then I suppose the horse that won in Leopardstown he's a very strong traveller. And obviously, he would like a strong pace in a race. Like he is a strong traveller. So I suppose they're all different types, but I suppose the horse in Leopardstown is the strongest traveller throughout, I think, you know.
And how many would you expect to run in the Oaks, Aidan?
It's very possible that we'll run 3. I think we could run the filly that were 2nd and 3rd in the Irish Guineas, and we could run the filly from Chester as well. That's what we're thinking at the moment. Like obviously there's others in and they could run, but they look like the 3 most obvious at the moment. And
do you think one of those has taken a good step forward from her last run to put it up to the hot favourite Emily Upjohn?
Listen, we've been very happy with him. Obviously, they won't have done much since last week, but we've been very happy with their canters and that. The filly from Chester has came forward. She's a filly, a very big filly that stays well and will improve plenty as the year goes on, we think.
And just finally, on a day when we're talking about great riding, we often praise great rides in victory, and rarely do we praise great rides in defeat. I wanted your appraisal of Ryan Moore on high definition at the Curragh the other day, because to my eye, that was pretty damn good.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We were delighted with him. I was delighted with his run. Like obviously he's a horse that stays very well. He's very uncomplicated. It just kind of all went a little bit wrong last year when he didn't get to run in the Derby, and his whole career took a different pattern. then he went to the Irish Derby, and he had clipped heels in the middle of the race, and kind of all his confidence went after that. But his runs this year, they have been coming lovely. Obviously, we were building up to the Curragh for his first day. His 2 runs, we didn't make the run with him. We dropped him in, and we knew that when he would go in front, he would be tough. Ryan set him off. He came out of the gates well, and he stayed very well. We were delighted with the ride Ryan gave him. Was a great ride, really, and we're looking forward to seeing him whenever he runs again. Really,
you've got him in the Coronation Cup. Are you thinking about it, or are you was it a speculative?
Yeah, no, we are thinking about it, but he did. It's only a couple of. It's not long, so it won't be 2 weeks when he goes back and run, and he did have a tough race. So we'll probably leave it go down to the wire before we really decide whether we let him run or not, I think.
Okay, Aidan, thanks so much for your time. Just finally, if you did get a 9th Derby, and you're going to be asked the question, you in the training ranks have done what Lester Piggott did as a jockey. How much would that mean to you?
I think it's very special for everybody, really. I think everybody puts everything in, and they're like I say, we're a very small part of a very big team, and very grateful to be the part we are. But it would mean so much to everybody, really. Listen, the Derby is a very tough race to win. We try and compete in it every year, and but don't ever take anything for granted. It's very, very tough, very hard to win, and we'll try our very best to try and win it this year. But it is very hard to win. Very tough race, Nick.
Aidan, we're looking forward to seeing you next weekend. Thanks so much for your thoughts, particularly on Leicester.
Yeah, pleasure, Nick. Thank you.
Aidan O'Brien set to saddle several horses in the Kazoo Derby in a bid for his 9th success. If you were just joining us, we woke this morning to the news of the death of Lester Piggott at the age of 86. He had been unwell, but I think the news as he passed away this morning in the early hours in Switzerland still came as a great shock to his family, who described themselves as shocked and devastated. One man who shared a weighing room, a jockey's room with Lester Piggott for many years, and is now closely involved with a horse who may yet win the Derby, is Bruce Raymond, who's on the line now. Bruce, good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, Nick.
We spoke at some length with Willie Carson earlier today. You and Willie knew Lester very well and spent many days with him. I'm sure some happy, some deeply frustrating, particularly if you were trying to compete with him. What for you will be your abiding memories of him?
Well, he was, as you say, he was tough, very tough to compete with, and I think, but we were all defensive of him. I was just thinking about, Willie and I, and we rode with some great, really tough jockeys where they used to sort of, I wouldn't say beat each other up, but you had to respect them, Frankie Durr and Eric Elder and people like that, and they were quite, they get quite angry when he used to jog us off. But if you went away abroad and somebody said anything about Lester Piggott, they'd immediately be very defensive of him and try to say, well, you're not good enough to clean his boots and things like that. So, but it was a good. I feel very privileged to have been able to ride with him. So
it was infuriating, but at the same time, you knew just what you were up against.
Definitely, for sure, yes, yes. I don't know. He was. I've lots and lots of stories about him, but they're mostly around the dinner table, Nick. That's the thing, But he was very tough to ride with, and he used to just jump out and get the fence in those days, and watch out for him. And I think everybody was frightened of him. If he was in the race, you're not frightened, but you didn't know when he was going to pop up on you. That's the one thing.
Do you think if he was riding in a race, it would force other people to make mistakes or to preempt something that might not happen? Yeah,
I'm not sure about that, Nick, but I just think you I think, as Willie said before, it made everybody a better jockey, because I think all jockeys even now try to copy their champions. You know, people keep copying Kieran Fallon and people in his era. But I think you couldn't actually copy him, but we were trying to do the right thing and ride in his style. Everybody was riding shorter and with their bottoms up in the air. So I think so. I don't think we were too frightened of him, but respecting you never knew where he was in the race, and he would do odd things. If he pulled off the fence, you knew something was going to happen in front.
And when you say he did odd things, do you think that was simply because his instincts were sharper? He just had that natural instinct.
Yeah, I mean, I remember winning on a horse in France of Robert Armstrong's. I think it's called Be My Native. I'm not sure what it won, Group 3 race or something. And I think he rode it in the Coronation, jumped out and went flat out all the way, a mile and a half. I'd run it a mile and a quarter. He rode it a mile and a half, flat out, really fast. And afterwards I said, well, what made you lead? He said, I thought it was the right idea, the good thing to do. So he used to do things like that. He did different things on horses, and when some people used to say nobody else would have won on it, there are occasions when nobody would have won on it because he used to do completely different things on a horse.
People quite often talk about his strength, you know, particularly his strength in a finish, how he could sort of lift one home. But do you believe his edge was more a tactical one than one of strength?
I think both, Nick. I really think both, because he knew where everybody was going to do in the race before they really knew. He knew where everybody was going to be placed and how it just came natural with him. I don't think he had to really study it so much. He just knew where everybody or the main opposition, or how they would ride their horse, and of course, in the finish, he was very, very much stronger than anybody else. But you could do those sort of things at those days, and he would always keep a very tight hold of a horse's head in the finish. And unlike Gordon Richards or Kieran Fallon, who used to have ride on a loose rein in completely different eras.
It's quite easy to draw together the strands to paint a portrait of Lester Piggott, the jockey. It's less straightforward to paint a portrait of Lester Piggott, the man, because he was clearly a fascinating, complex, multi-dimensional person, and rather enigmatic to most of us. Not necessarily to you, Bruce. If I was to say to you, who was Lester Piggott? Who was the man? What would you say?
Yeah, well, I think you're right. I equate him to someone like Frank Sinatra, or that everybody said, what was he really like? And he had this aura around him that even when he was sitting in the same room, if he walked into a crowded room, people would know he's walked in without turning round. It was that sort of thing. And he had this, we used to think of him a bit like Clint Eastwood at the time, and going in and out of the steward's room. And and he was very, although he had this reputation of being very mean and very careful, he was very, very generous with his time for other people. And if a jockey had a fall, no matter who they were, top jockey or younger jockey, he would definitely give them a call when he got home and see how are you and how's things and do you need anything, and if they were being taken care of. I know he was very generous with his time for those sort of people. You know.
Bruce, to what extent do you think that aura was cultivated in order to enable him to maintain his standing?
Was it cultivated? I think it just came natural. As Willie said, he had this impediment in his speech, and he was just very, very quiet. I went over to see him a couple of weeks ago, and we were just chit-chatting about, he wasn't very well, and chit-chatting about old things, old. What I was trying to make the conversation, and he was he was just saying, yeah, well, it's all history now. It doesn't really matter, does it? Well, it does to other people, but not to him. And I just think I think this aura became natural to him. He definitely knew that that we all loved him and that he was famous. I'm sure of that. But he was very casual about it, and he appreciated everybody idolizing him, I guess.
But at the same time, from what you were saying, some slightly kind of, not blasé is the wrong word, casual is the word you used, about his own achievements. Do you think that that's what prolonged his career? That really he was kind of empty unless he was looking toward the next one?
For sure, yeah. He didn't think about. He only thought about racing, and I'm not sure if that's answering your question. But I went skiing with him with Jamie when he was a little boy, and he wasn't interested in skiing at all. He just went. I think he skied for one day. The rest he was watching Wolverhampton on television. We were in Gstaad or somewhere like that, and I thought, he's just totally dedicated to watch television. He had no other interests. Didn't read books. Didn't watch TV. Just only interested in horse racing. So I think I just I don't know. You tell me. I don't know, Nick. Can't say any more about him.
The only one bit of insight I can come up with myself, Bruce, is that when I interviewed him at Epsom maybe about 4 years ago, we sat down in a box there, and we were bowled a bit of a googly because there was an incredibly loud tannoy test that was taking place for the entirety of the interview. And if there's one man you didn't want to interview when there was blaring out the tannoy, it was Leicester.
Yes.
But I do remember asking him about Frankel and Frankel's place in the firmament of great horses and who he believed were the greatest horses of the modern era. And without missing a beat, he just went Seabird 1, Rebo 2, Frankel 3, that's it. And it was that kind of absolute certainty. I thought, here's a man who just, was completely in command of what he believed and thought about the sport and about horses.
Definitely, yes. And everybody was always what was the best Derby when he rode. And he was, as you say, he knew in his mind, back of his mind, what the best horses were around at that time. And you wouldn't have thought of a Rebo or something like that. But obviously, most of us weren't born when he was around. But he just knew those sort of things, and he didn't think about anything else except racing, horse racing, all the time, even till he passed away, I think.
You heard Willie earlier on, Bruce, and he said he sort of felt like he'd lost a limb. That little part of him had gone as well. Do you identify with that?
I do indeed. Yeah, my thoughts are with Susan and Tracy and daughters Tracy and Maureen, who've been going backwards and forwards a lot recently. And I just think, it's sure. It's some. I knew he was ready to go, but it's something when they've actually passed away, they're not sort of like how's Leicester today is gone, and that era is, as you say, is completely just gone, and we've got to start think about something else. I don't know. It's quite devastating, really, that he's no longer can you say how's he feeling? How is he today? Is he getting better? So it's all very, very sad.
Bruce, thank you so much for your time this morning.
Not at all, Nick. No, thanks a lot. Thank you.
Bruce Raymond. Bruce, now, having been a fine jockey in his time and a contemporary of Lester Piggott, is spending quite a bit of his time as racing manager Saeed Sahel, the owner of Desert Crown, amongst others, the current favourite for the Derby. Desert Crown's trained by Sir Michael Stout, who provided some very notable moments in the career of Lester Piggott and has had a couple of fairly notable moments of his own in the last couple of weeks. Sir Michael, good morning.
Good morning, Nick.
Waking up this morning and having to say Lester Piggott has died at the age of 86 was I think a very strange moment and feeling. We know when people get old, the inevitable will happen, but just try from your perspective to give us some context as to the impact this man had on the sport?
Yes, it was enormous. Because everybody respected him so much. He was actually a genius on a racehorse. And he could control a lot of things and get on the horses that he wanted to get onto.
He had that extraordinary personality that perhaps we'll come on to in a moment. When you started training and he rode for you a bit and with some success as well, when you looked at him, when you tried to analyse what it was that made him better than everybody else, or made him more successful than everyone else, perhaps I should say, what do you think it was?
Well, I think that it was his knowledge. He made sure he knew about everything. And he was a genius on a racehorse. And you would have to sort of speak to a jockey to explain exactly what that meant. But, you know, he knew, he had the whole picture. And every bit of information, it got into his tray.
So he was all-seeing, all-knowing. From a trainer's point of view, when he did ride a horse, say a young horse, and I know he rode Gerard as a 2-year-old, for example, how much could he give you when he got off a horse?
How much, sorry?
How much could he give you when he got off a horse?
Sorry, Nick, I can't hear. How much?
How much could he give you? What sort of? Yeah.
Well, it would depend on if he liked the horse or not. If he didn't, he was blunt. But in fact, in 1980, he started coming around the house on an evening in February, and didn't say much. And then it came up that he'd fallen out with A and B and C, and he was looking around for some horses, and the year went very well, and we had some lovely 2-year-olds that progressed at 3, but everything changed whereby Joe Mercer left Warren Place, so then he got pulled up to Warren Place, etc., etc. But we rode Gerard in the Irish Derby, and then he won the Guineas for me as well, both on occasions when Walter was suspended.
We'll have a look at the Irish Derby, because he rode Gerard for you on this occasion. I mean, I think it's fair to say, Michael, that this is the spare ride of all spare rides, isn't it? But you've still got to go there with all that pressure on and deliver.
Yeah, I don't think he felt very much pressure with him. He knew he was a machine. He knew him well as a 2-year-old, and when he got beaten at Doncaster by Belldale Futter, albeit he said he's not quite right, this horse. He says he hasn't picked up like I expected him to.
There was no mistake at Epsom. There was no mistake at the Curragh. This is a piece of footage you don't often see. We always see the replay of the Derby. We don't often see the replay of the Irish Derby. And I'd quite forgotten just how easy that was as well.
Yeah. The thing was, Walter was 19 years old and he was winning too far on him. Sandown, Chester, Epsom. He was using up too much petrol. Leicester just gave him a lovely afternoon on the bridle.
Ah, very special. And the horse that you mentioned he won the 2,000 guineas on was a horse called Shadid. That was in 1985. So I suppose that's the back end of the very long first chapter of his riding career. But the remarkable thing is, Michael, his powers didn't seem to wane at all.
Well, no, he had to be very powerful on Shadid. That was a tough finish with Ben. And
we're just going to have a look at it now. Shadid over there on the far side, and as you say, he had to give him the absolute maximum. What was the thinking going into the race between the two of you?
Well, we were confident because he'd won the Craven so well, but he was just below par on Guineas Day, although it's a very good horse. It was second to him. Yeah, we were disappointed that he didn't do it in better fashion.
But you had the right man on your side. Is this one of those occasions where you thought, yeah, if it hadn't been for Leicester, I might not have won that?
Well, was Willie on the second?
Now you're going to have to tell me.
I can't remember. I'm not seeing the film, and I think he was.
That we can run the finish again. Ben was the horse who was runner-up, wasn't he? Yeah. Well, I don't know if you were probably out with the horses earlier, but I was chatting to Willie earlier in the show.
Yes.
And obviously I had to bring up Hot Grove and the Minstrel.
Yeah.
Which is a sort of iconic Piggott Carson finish, isn't it? Looking at it again, it looks like Willie on the second, doesn't it, Neil?
Yes.
Yeah. And
there weren't many better than Willie in the finish and otherwise.
Yeah, it is Willie. Second again. To the great man. I'm speaking to Bruce a few moments ago, Bruce Raymond, Michael, and talking about Leicester the man, and he was adding some quite rich colour there and saying that there were quite a few attributes of his character that a lot of people didn't really see. You know, you saw what he wanted you to see, which was quite often not very much and something a bit enigmatic. But if I was to say to you, who was he? What sort of man was he? What would you say?
Well, I think he was a very clever man, and it depended on the mood you caught him in.
Right.
He could be very loquacious and very interesting and amusing. He was changeable. but fascinating.
And you touched on that 1980 moment. You know, had the cards fallen a different way, would there have been, do you think, a long, flourishing, burgeoning relationship in which he would have ridden you, 6 dozen Group 1 winners?
I don't know. I don't know how long he would have stayed. I was hoping it would have been longer.
So, slightly the one that got away, but of course at the time you did have a pretty brilliant young rider in Walter Swinburne in your hands.
As a result, he came in and I had to give him the job because if I didn't, he would have gone to Peter Wall. And my intention was to just have him riding behind Leicester.
Willie Carson talked earlier about how he dragged a whole generation of jockeys almost up to a better level, up to a better standard. Do you look back on that time in the 70s, or sort of late 60s, 70s, early 80s, as a golden generation of riders, or are we looking through rose-tinted specs?
Oh, I think they were a golden generation. I really do. And you had the Australians as well. You know, it was so much international talent.
You press on forward this week with the favourite for the Derby in Desert Crown. You've been speaking very warmly about him in recent days. It sounds as though everything's gone really smoothly up to this point. Is that right?
Touchwood, yeah, all is well. Yeah.
We're having a little look back at the Dante here.
Yes.
The Dante's a trial that you've liked before, timing wise. What do you like to see between this and the time he turns up to Epsom? What do you do with him at home? How much do you do with him?
Well, it depends on the individual. We won a few Dantes that have gone. With a few Dante horses have gone won at Epsom. I like the timing. I like the Knaves Mar. It's a trial that would be my favourite for a Derby horse. Touchwood, things have gone all right with this fella. He lacks a bit of experience, but I was very pleased with him in the trial, and we can only hope.
You've taken horses with similarly little experience to Epsom before, and they've done very well. I sort of wonder whether we overrate the concept of experience in terms of how many races horses have had. Sir Michael, if they've got the right temperament for it.
No, I think the experience, You know, there's no substitute for that. Ideally, I would have preferred him to have had one or two more races.
And do you think he has got the right mental approach for a derby? Yes,
he did things very well coming across the Naves, Mara, York. It's always a good test, that. He's got the temperament for it. We'll just find out if he's good enough.
It's a big, big day for you and for him. It's a big day also for his rider, Richard Kingscote, who's a cool character for sure. I don't suppose the occasion's going to get to him too much. What is it you admire in him?
Well, I think he's very intelligent, and he's a sympathetic rider, and he can be strong when he needs to be. And we've had him riding quite a bit of work for the last 2 to 3 years, and he's ridden a lot of winners, and I do rate him.
Big day for you on Saturday, and big day for him, of course, but we saw another, well, I think, potential star at Sandown earlier in the week, giving you yet another win in must be one of your favourite races, the Brigadier Gerard in Bay Bridge.
Yes.
Right. Where is this horse headed now? I'm guessing the Prince of Wales is and beyond, but could he go all the way to the very top and be one of the really good ones?
Well, I can't tell you that now, but I was surprised that he won it so well at Sandown, because he'd been off a long time and he's not the most extravagant home worker. So that was a delight to see. And yes, he'll go for the Prince of Wales.
And there was just a nice little bit of cut in the ground at Sandown. Is he a horse that you'd be confident could replicate his form on any surface?
I think he's impervious to ground conditions, but I wouldn't want it very firm.
Let's just have a look at the Stout Brigadier Gerard winners. I read these out the other day. This is I don't think you can see a monitor, but
no.
This is a serious list. Stagecraft was a very good horse. Opera House was a fabulous horse. Pilsudski was a great horse. Insatiable and Not Now Catered were really good horses. Workforce, brilliant on his day. Carlton House, autocratic. Poet's Word was very good. And Bay Bridge. I mean, this is a wonderful pantheon of talent. Where do you think he fits in there?
Well, we need a little bit more evidence, but he's going the right way.
What's your hunch?
Oh, yeah, I'm very sweet on him at the moment.
That'll do. We're looking forward to seeing him again in the Prince of Wales.
Let us hope.
To Michael. Thanks so much for your thoughts this morning,
Pleasure.
and particularly your thoughts on Lester Piggott. I'm very much looking forward to seeing you at Epsom at the weekend.
Thank you very much, Nick. Cheers.
Michael Stout. And if we're talking today, Neil Callan and David Menuisier, about greats of the game who choose their words carefully, and you listen when they do speak, we've just been hearing from one.
We've heard from two. We've heard from Aidan O'Brien as well. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, look, Sir Michael is he's a top-class trainer. He's been around for a long time, and you know, the horse that won at Sandown, I was really impressed with him myself. You know, regardless of the derby coming up, but I was very impressed with him, and that the fact that earlier in the year he changed hands, you know, or a share of him changed hands to a stud, kind of made you kind of sit up and think, oh, this could have a future this season. Yeah. So I just love the way he gallops. He just carries himself so well. He sticks his head out with the right position, and you know, he really kind of attacks the ground in front of him. And you know, you don't win the Brigadier Gerard in that sort of style if you're not pretty decent.
Yeah, it was a beautiful performance, wasn't it? Sandown's a track you like very much, isn't it? When you like taking good ones there.
My horses like it too, yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure why, but yeah, we tend to do well there. Yeah, maybe it's the uphill finish. I find that Sandown has a reputation for being a front-running track. I've won very few races from the front. I think you can win from wherever, depending on the pace of the race. But it's a very nice, fair track.
It's quite interesting because Thursday morning, Bay Bridge was, I think, 16, maybe even bigger for the Prince of Wales as at Ascot, and I looked and I saw Shahryar was favourite, the Japanese horse who won in Dubai. Adayar was favourite actually. Shahryar was second favourite, and Mishrif was third in. And you thought, well, we haven't seen Adayar. Of course, he's now out. We don't really know what Mishrif is now. We might find out in a minute. And we don't know whether the Japanese horse will be able to show his form here. And of course, did I take my own advice? Of course I didn't. And then watch this. He's going to take an awful lot of beating now, isn't he? Particularly given what Michael Stout just said.
Oh, you should always go on your first instinct, Nick, and don't hesitate.
We've got a Stout trained favourite for the Derby, which a decade ago wouldn't have been at all unusual in Desert Crown. Is he for you very much the one to beat, David?
Yeah, look, I mean, he was very impressive when he won at York. He did it very easily. He showed greenness still, you know, when he comes off the bridle, he still doesn't quite know what to do, and then he finds his balance and he quickens really well. It's an ideal trial. I mean, he got a couple of slaps there. 3. Yeah, look, I mean, he couldn't have won any easier, really. So it is a very impressive performance, and he should stay well too. So that'd be great, and that would be great for Sir Michael to get back to the big time. Yeah.
I'm guessing that he is somebody that you would very much look up to. I know that sounds a bit trite, because of course he's one of the great trainers, everyone does, but the way that you train horses, the way you like to take your time a little bit and be quite patient.
Yeah, absolutely. I think he really is he would be the icon for me to try and copy or reach as much as possible. Yeah, because he takes his time. He gives them time to get better with age, which is what we are trying to do in a very humble way.
If you've just joined us on the show this morning, we woke today to the news of the death of Lester Piggott at the age of 86 in Switzerland in the early hours of this morning. It's come, albeit that he was unwell and had been unwell for a little while, it has come as a great shock to everybody in the horse racing industry. He has left such an enormous impact on this sport, and truly was one in a generation. I'm joined by multiple champion trainer John Gosden. John, good morning.
Good morning.
Your early memories of Lester, I have no doubt, will have left as big an impact on you as just about anyone, won't they?
Yes, very much so. He was with Sir Noel Merlis actually in the 1970s, and then with Vincent O'Brien in the 1970s. And there's no doubt they listened very carefully to everything he said, which was never very much, and really valued his opinion of the horses. And obviously, as a jockey, he was stupendous. Work mornings could be interesting because Lester operated by what he wanted to find out about the horses, so that was obviously to him very important, but an absolute genius in the saddle.
You get this sense, speaking to everybody this morning, from Bruff Scott through Willie Carson to Sir Michael to Aidan O'Brien, Bruce Raymond. This is a man who danced to the beat of his own drum, or marched to the beat of his own drum, but it didn't stop the adulation for him amongst racing fans.
No, very much. He had a massive public following, and there was very much, in a sense, the mystery. What's Lester thinking? What's he going to do? Yes, he's incredibly single-minded and intensely competitive and determined, with a great dry sense of humour. I think probably one of the great descriptions of him was by Hugh McIlvenney, who referred to him as a volcano in an iceberg. And I think that very much was Lester.
An absolutely brilliant line. And I guess when, John, when you were as you say, working for Noel Merlis and Vincent O'Brien in the 70s. This was peak Piggott, wasn't it? This is when he had a complete stranglehold on the game.
Very much so. I mean, obviously, you know, he watched it. In a race, he'd be watching everyone else's horses as well, working out what he wanted to ride next time. He was so far ahead of it that way. And obviously, you know, commanded such respect. And when when he came back in 1990 to win, we were all at Belmont to win on Royal Academy, sweeping wide at Belmont, age 54. That sort of, in a sense, defined the man that he was. He put his body through hell all those years to be below to get down to any kind of weight that he could ride in. It was extraordinary what he subjugated himself to, and he's lived to the age of 86, which is an incredible achievement in itself.
It's a very interesting that, and particularly going back to Belmont Park and Royal Academy, and Bruff said right at the beginning of the show, he just caught the smile. He just caught him actually smiling, having won a race, and sort of the broadest grin as he pulled up. Do you think what you were describing there about the self-sacrifice that he had to put himself through, do you think that actually impinged on his enjoyment of the day-to-day business?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think he was quite mischievous. He might be waiting. We'd leave Sandown Park and we'd have to stop at Hampton Court to get the ice creams. And you guaranteed one thing: he'd get his ice cream, but you'd be paying for it. And he loved tricks like that. He was at the races one time at Maison Lafitte, and he wanted to get to the airport to play. And so he just took this owner's car. So the owner came out 10 minutes later, no car. The owner never made it to the plane. I mean, Lester liked playing games like that. But he was, without doubt, the smartest, cleverest, and he was tremendous company. And I know Maureen and Tracy and the whole family have been with him, and he enjoyed watching his racing right up to the end, I hear. So what a guy. We'll miss him enormously.
And that, we talked a little earlier in the programme about the legacy of Dr. O'Brien and Lester together as one. That's a sort of trainer-jockey relationship that absolutely fascinates me. These two incredibly powerful personalities. I mean, you'd be closer to it than most. Just give me some flavour of that dynamic.
Well, obviously, massive respect. But I remember once working the minstrel back early in the year at Ballydoyle. He slightly did the opposite of what Vincent asked him to do, and Vincent was so upset about it. He wouldn't talk to him, and he said he's not riding here for another month. And when he came back, he made him canter some horses in the rain on their own to report on their actions. That was just Vincent's way of saying, don't annoy me again. But they had an incredible relationship. And you know, horses like Minstrel Arteus, Be My Guest, Try My Best, all in that year were extraordinary horses. And, you know, Lester rode his own way. When he won the Arc on Alleged, he didn't follow the instructions. He decided he was going to set his own gallop and do his own thing and control the race, which he so often did, and he won it. So he could go against what was agreed, but then a jockey should be allowed to in a race. That's what it's all about.
John, in your career, how many jockeys have changed the game, do you think, that you've seen and witnessed?
Well, he obviously enormously, you know, and he's riding shorter than anyone else. But then look at his height. But he had the most wonderful balance on a horse. Yes, he changed it in many ways, and no doubt Steve Cawthon, when he came here, he had a huge influence in that early period. But there's no doubt that you know, Lester commanded such respect. Everyone wanted to follow him, but he, like all geniuses, he was impossible to follow. You couldn't imitate him because he was completely unique. So anyone imitating is going to be a very poor imitation. And to that extent, that's why he so often set the tone. And of course, with Scobie Breesley, they were battling it out for years in the championships.
And you can remember, I'm sure, that level of superstardom that we can't really get a handle on nowadays, I don't think.
Well, I think in fairness, you know, racing was very central. You know, it's very bigger than football.
I think we might have just lost John there. I heard a little click and...
you know, the following was enormous in British racing then.
Yeah. John, we move on to pay tribute to Lester Piggott in the most appropriate environment possible at Epsom, where he just seemed to be the great conjurer, mesmerising everybody with all sorts of contrasting rides. Which do you think his finest Epsom ride was?
I think the Minstrel was pretty extraordinary, and that finish with Willie Carson, that was extraordinary in itself. I think the one that was wonderful to watch was Survivor. With Connaught, looked like he got it with Sandy Barclay, and then the way he produced that acceleration. I mean, Nijinsky, all of those, Nijinsky being a Triple Crown winner, but, you know, I would have thought there was probably some a lot cleverer rides, but he was a great advisor when he retired to young jockeys about how to ride Epsom. He came and talked to William Buick before he rode in the Derby first. So, but that was once he retired, he'd give you his thoughts, not until then.
Well, quite. We spoke to Frankie earlier on. He doesn't need too much advice about how to ride Epsom these days. How confident are you feeling that he'll deliver you another Oaks winner on Friday?
Well, you know, the fillies are in good order. They've worked nicely coming in, and Holly sat up on Nashua this morning. So I think that they're two lovely fillies. But, you know, until you take on Epsom and going 1.5 miles for the first time, it's you don't truly know. I mean, you've got to handle the track, you've got to handle the trip, you've got to handle everything else. So it's never given, but they seem in very good order at the moment.
And do you feel, temperament-wise, I was asking Sir Michael the same question about Desert Crown, that they've got the requisite attributes? There's no sort of red flags that you're thinking, oh, I'm not sure about a bit of a carnival atmosphere, or, you know, getting a bit buzzed up?
Well, that's always a factor. You know, in the old days, we used to pull up at the end of the chute and cross the road and go through the gypsy encampment. It's a little bit different. All the caravans, everybody shouting and screaming. They've got a long way to go now, of course. They go 1.5 miles to the start. We know what happened to Olivia Pelly a few years ago with that American filly. So that's quite it's demanding on the horse, but that's the whole point of Epsom, isn't it? To be mentally demanding, and also demanding of speed, of stamina and agility. So it does ask a lot of questions. It's not what you'd necessarily peg out as the perfect race to run your big one, but it's unique, and it's to that extent it demands of horses that no other track does.
It's a nice story with the owner of Emily Upjohn, John Shack, who's had a really interesting history in the sport, and I was chatting with Tom Goff, who's been quite closely involved with the story earlier in the week, and he was saying that it's a great position to be in, but an invidious one in a way, because the filly's got such a huge reputation now that the nerves are really starting to jangle. Are you managing to keep everything cool for everyone?
Well, I think, Frankie sort of, you know, having won a novice sort of started talking about wow factors and things. Well, that, of course, is going to shorten the betting. Then, actually, when you put Frankie on these horses at the big meetings, the odds are shaved, because he gets what I call a lot of just friendly punter people. Oh, there's Frank, I'll back him. And to that extent, you can always say that those horses go up too short when he jumps up on them, and if you put another jockey on, they probably might go something more realistic price. But look, I tend not to look at the betting.
I know.
It's not really. I think you've just got to get there on the day and hope that things go as smoothly as possible.
We've talked about a lot in this show about great jockeys who've mesmerised people, and jockey-trainer relationships. I did smile the other day when, you know, it's great for us, because when Frankie lights the flame about a horse, it makes our lives just so much more interesting and great. But from your perspective as a trainer, how does it feel?
Well, obviously we prefer to, you know, keep things a little bit more to level pegging, and just, you know, I've never believed in shouting about horses before races. I've always got respect for the opposition. You never know how the race is going to unfold, what the pace will be, will you get trouble in running. So I don't like banging drums too much before, because they can be empty symbols quite quickly.
Sir Michael and I were talking about not only about Desert Crown, but about Bay Bridge. Wow, I know that trainers generally don't like to talk about other people's horses, but being left in the wake by him, you must have been scratching your head thinking, I might have run into a bit of a monster.
Well, no, actually, I was asking James Wigan about him the other day. I said, where's that lovely horse, Bay Bridge? He said, oh, he'll be out soon. I said, oh, great. I mean, I was impressed with him last year. I thought what he did at Newbury, actually, in the London Gold Cup was exceptional. And he's, Michael's brought him along, obviously, very gently, very gradually, and he looked magnificent in the paddock. And I just thought, this is the one we've all got to beat straight away. But the way he quickened, he left them all for dead.
He's in the Prince of Wales, as I was just saying a few moments ago. I saw you still had a couple in there. Well, Mishriff was the obvious one who's still there. Is he anywhere near coming back?
Mishriff will either be Prince of Wales or Eclipse. We'll just decide in the next 10 days. Has he come back to good nick? Yeah, he had a bit of a rough trip, and they went mad, and he got a lot of dirt down his gullet and his face. So it didn't work out too well, but it worked out very well in the Saudi Cup the year before. So you can't always have a perfect trip. And I think to that extent, we'll be heading to one of the races, but we'll just see which ones. No, he's been a wonderful horse. It would be great to see him come back. I mean, are you pretty hopeful that you can get him somewhere near his best? Well, I hope so. We'll be in trouble if we don't. I mean, he's showing you nice things at home. That's all I'm asking, I guess. We haven't done the stronger work yet, so we'll see. We're just as likely to wait for the Eclipse. Okay. John, thanks so much for your thoughts this morning, particularly on Leicester, and we'll catch up later in the week. Bye. John Gosden, who with son Thady trains Emily Up, John and Nashwa, market leaders for the Kazoo Oaks. Is it as straightforward as that, do you think, David, for the Oaks?
Look, Epsom is an enigma for many. So until you run the race, you never really know who's going to handle it or not. But I mean, I have to admit, like everybody else, the field is very impressive. So it would be nice to have another superstar as well. And I completely understand why John Gosden wants to keep expectations managed. That's your job, really, as a trainer in Part, Neil. But it's equally understandable as to why Frankie Dettori wants to enthuse about her.
Yeah, of course. Like, I mean, you've got to speak or appreciate, from Frankie's point of view, what you've got coming up. So, you've got to be excited about things like that. But I was at Sandown when she won the novice, and considering that she carried a penalty, she had £7 penalty, and she just destroyed them. And big, strong filly, galloped out really well, looked very, very well balanced, and she looked like she took a step forward at York. And look, when you look at her, she looks like in the paddock, she looks like an amazing temperament and looks very, very easy to ride. So look, she's got all the attributes and everything there, but like Mr. Gosden said, it's a horse race, and certain things can happen in a horse race that can be out of your control. So look, until they go and do it, you can only prep them, take them there in their best condition, and for their purpose, hopefully everything goes nice and smooth for them. And it could be that the danger is within, in the shape of Nashwa. I suppose the question with her, David, and you were probably there the day at Newbury. That's it. I mean, all the questions will be answered next Friday. I mean, we can speculate as much as we want until until they run. We won't really know, but there is a doubt, obviously. Okay, we're going to take a very short break, but we'll continue our tribute to the life and career of Lester Piggott, who died this morning, when you rejoin us in a few moments. Is that working?
Luck on Sunday, proudly sponsored by Al Basti Equiworld Dubai.
Want to know what's coming up on Racing TV? Keep up with the latest action, or have your say on the big news stories? Are you interested in extra features, competitions, and replays of great races from the past? Racing TV's social media channels are always at your fingertips. Watch the day's big races again and join the debate with others. Read tips from the experts and catch up on the breaking news from the Racing TV website. Enjoy highlights from the channel and the expert insight that you might have missed. Racing TV's social channels already have over 500,000 followers, keeping themselves in the know every day with updates around the clock. Wherever you are in the world, you can stay ahead of the pack by following us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Join them now by following Racing TV on social media today.
And they're off for the Kazoo Derby.
Quarter race will give Piggott his first derby. The father and son combination won the Investec Derby with Camelot. And it is Golden Horn, driven out, remains unbeaten.
Untitled is striding clear to win the Kazoo Derby.
Luck on Sunday, proudly sponsored by Al Basti Equiworld Dubai.
Well, if you have just joined us today, we have been reflecting for much of the last 2.5 hours on the news that broke this morning of the death of the greatest, one of the modern greats of the sport, Lester Piggott, at the age of 86 in Switzerland in the early hours of this morning. Our thoughts clearly with his many friends in the sport, his huge fan base in the sport, and particularly with his family, with his daughters Maureen and Tracy and son Jamie. The man with whom he was perhaps most closely associated in terms of a jockey-trainer relationship during his career was Dr. Vincent O'Brien, another game changer, another man who reshaped the sport. Many of his iconic Derby successes on Sir Ivor and Golden Fleece and the Minstrel and more were for Dr. O'Brien, training out of Ballydoyle. Vince O'Brien's son Charles joins me on the line now. Charles, good morning.
Morning, Nick.
And for you, Charles, Lester Piggott must have just been a massive part of your life, personally and professionally.
Oh, he was, absolutely. I mean, when I was growing up in the 70s, you know, he was a figure every weekend. He was never out of thinking at any stage. They had it wasn't always the most harmonious relationship the two of them had. It could be pretty fraught at times, but they had a lot of good days too.
But if you look at the ebb and flow of Lester's career, this was a partnership and a relationship that stood a pretty decent test of time.
Oh, it did, absolutely. I mean, very much, I think, as John Gosden said, they were both very, very intelligent men, but very strong-willed. And they kind of came to an arrangement where they both sort of did their own thing, but tried to coexist at the same time. One of the things they always used to do, which I always liked, was say on one of the big trial days at the start of the season, Lester would come over and he might ride, 4 or 5 fillies, guineas horses, derby horses, whatever. There'd never be a debrief in the parade ring afterwards. It was always left till that evening. Lester would go home, he'd bring the video of the races home with him, he'd watch it at home, and then he'd call my dad at sort of 8 o'clock that evening after dinner, and they could spend maybe an hour on the phone discussing it then. There was only a couple of monosyllabic grunts immediately after the race.
I think this is something that I've learned during the course of the last couple of hours, really, Charles, is that we could all see that he was instinctively brilliant. We could all see that he was the leader of his generation. But actually it was about knowledge and a thirst for knowledge and a hunger to just be a step ahead in terms of what he knew, as much as he was a step ahead in terms of his athletic ability or ability in the saddle.
Oh, 100%. He was not, I think, as we all know, he wasn't one to discuss it very much. But, you knew that brain was working away very fast. I mean, for instance, he might go off to Paris one day on a Sunday to ride at Longchamp, nothing to do with my dad, to ride for whoever else. And he'd come back and he'd call my dad and say, there was a horse that finished 4th in the Group 3 there, you should have a look at. And he might have even ridden in the race, but he was always just thinking a little bit outside the box.
Yeah, because I was talking to Aidan a little earlier on about, has there ever been another jockey in the history of the sport who's had such a sort of interesting influence on a training establishment and on a breeding conglomerate? Do you see what I'm saying?
Oh, 100%. And I think that it was probably a stroke of luck that it was Lester that ended up riding those Northern Dancers when they first came over. I mean, they weren't a straightforward breed at all. Starting off with Nijinsky, he was obviously the first. And he was very far from straightforward. And between, you know, the staff at Ballydoyle and the training of him there and the relationship with Leicester, and obviously Liam Ward, who rode him as well, you know, it was a big help because, as I say, they weren't a straightforward breed. And as we all know how dominant it's become in the last 40, 50 years.
Yeah, I think there probably will not be a horse in the Derby, Oaks and Coronation Cup next weekend who's not directly descended from him. So you're not just talking about someone who is helping an enterprise along. You're almost talking about a jockey who's having an influence on the entire breed.
Yes, absolutely. As I say, they weren't easy rides, a lot of them, and he was definitely able to coax more out of them than maybe anybody else could.
Do you have a personal memory, a particularly fond memory of either one of those derbies or a race that he won for your father?
I suppose the one that always sticks in my mind is the Royal Academy's Breeders' Cup, because I was sort of full time in Ballydoyle working at that time. So that definitely has a memory, and the comeback, and it being owned by the horse being owned by a public company, and the Breeders' Cup was only really in its infancy at that point. I don't know how many European winners there've been, but very few. So that was a pretty special day.
The lead up to this, you read about it, it's just extraordinary, because the fact that Leicester rode him seemed improbable right to the 11th hour, really. Can you remember how all the pieces fit together?
Oh, I can, yeah. I mean, I think my father and John Magno are quite influential in him making his comeback. He'd been riding out in Newmarket, and I think they had dinner one day, and they had lunch one day in Dublin, and they encouraged him. So he started riding out a bit, and then rode a few winners, and then he came over with my dad and rode a few winners, and then I think John Reid had ridden Royal Academy all year, and he had a fall on Arc Day. And we were at the Newmarket Sales, and I remember we walked into the Newmarket Sales, and there was a big tree on the left. And I don't know whether Leicester was hiding in it or behind us or what, but he suddenly appeared from nowhere and suggested that he might ride Royal Academy in New York.
Absolutely brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. I mean, this knack, barring one notable exception, of course, in his life, of sort of putting himself in the right spot at the right time was great. It was a bit like Michael Stout telling us earlier that 1980 had a very good group of 2-year-olds, and suddenly Leicester would be popping around every evening.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I'd say he definitely kept his finger on the pulse. The brain never stopped working.
Tell me a little bit about what Derby Day was like as Vincent O'Brien's son in the 70s.
It was pretty traumatic, because there was no doubt there was only one race my dad really wanted to win. It was the Derby, and everything else was a distant second, was the reality. So every year you were looking at what horses there were and balancing them around with the trials, and hoping you'd come up with one that was good enough. And then was there a possibility that Leicester might bail out and try and ride somebody else's horse, which was very possible. No, it was always at the apex of the season, really, from the Ballydoyle point of view at that stage.
And how much did John and Sue Magner were in touch earlier on in the programme, suggesting the extent to which he could drive him absolutely crackers, leaving his decision to the 11th hour. Is that something you can remember quite well?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it was. My dad didn't have a huge amount of patience, and Leicester tested it to its utmost. But then it worked the other way too. I mean, he got onto Roberto when he wasn't really supposed to. He was somebody else. He was Bill Williamson's ride, and Leicester sort of chucked himself onto the horse. And I really don't think he would have won for anyone else. That's probably the strongest ride I can remember he gave one.
Yeah, that was Roberto in 72, and Survivor, of course, was an absolute joy to watch. And the Minstrel's probably the iconic one, isn't it, I guess?
Yeah, it's probably the one that everyone remembers best. I suppose it's the most recent one.
Yeah, back in 77. Charles, if there's a couple of sentences in which you would sum up Leicester Piggott the man, what would they be?
He was completely unique. I mean, there have been great jockeys before him, and there will be great jockeys after him. There are great jockeys after him, but he was entirely unique in the industry. He was a little bit like Frankie's probably the only person who's done it who's done it since. He's transcended racing and gone into the public consciousness.
Charles, thanks so much for your time this morning.
No problem.
Charles O'Brien, son of the late Dr. Vincent O'Brien, with whom Lester Piggott had such an extraordinary, sometimes volatile, but incredibly productive relationship. God, what times they were, Neil. I kind of feel this morning, I always want to go back and feel a bit of that, horse racing, 1970s atmosphere, really.
Yeah, I was only born then, so.
Yeah, well, you and me both.
Yeah, I suppose after listening to all that, I'm not sure if I wanted to ride in that era. There was too many good jockeys. But look, it just, it's amazing how that kind of like sets the tone, stage or whatever it is for the racing in future, for us to look back at it and see how good they were. And then how good Leicester was. You know, it's, you talk about so many great jockeys, and there is and was, and there will be. And then and there's Leicester. You know, that's the way everybody seems to view it as. He was just one of a kind. One of a kind.
David Menwizi, I bet you wished you'd been there then and could have given him the leg up a few times.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, also racing was probably the main entertainment in those days, and probably the main sport as well. So that's one thing that, well, hopefully we will see again, but probably not. And now, look, he's absolutely extraordinary, and he was, and no, it would have been a privilege, really.
And it's been fantastic to see him so many times at the Derby since his second retirement. It's been an amazing life, an extraordinary career, and it's been pointed out not once but more than once over the last 2.5 hours, Neil, that given what he had to put himself through to ride in that many races and ride for so long, to have this full life to the age of 86 was an achievement in and of itself.
Yeah, it's an amazing that, like, not just his career and his riding abilities be celebrated. You know, of course, it's a very sad day because it's quite abrupt. It's only like recently we thought that he was starting to improve and he might go home, but you know, it's quite a shock to hear. And you know, I suppose when you look at it, then you go like, well, you know, actually, you've got to celebrate these sort of things. You've got to appreciate what he has given future jockeys, even now and going forward. Something to look up to and something to aspire to. But you know, it's funny actually, I have a story. Years ago, I was about to get married, and one of my best friends used to drive him. And he came and played golf with us. He used to love playing golf. And he used to always go to Bury St Edmunds and go like 4 p.m. off peak time, cheapest. And he would always play at that time as well because the pro shop would be shut, and we'd go in and he'd rent a cart to pull his trolley or to his bag, and to hire the trolley was like £2, and you'd always get the center thing for the bag to sit on, and you had to get it from the pro shop. So he obviously rented it, got it, we played. By the time we come back, the pro shop was shut, so he put the attachment in his boot, and forevermore after that, he kept it. So he didn't have to pay £2 to rent his trolley ever again.
As we said a little bit earlier on, the man who marched to the beat of his own drum, the singular, brilliant, spectacular talent that was Lester Piggott. David, Neil, thank you very much for your company today.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for watching through the last 2.5 hours as we've paid tribute to one of the most extraordinary and dominant, mercurial, enigmatic talents any sport has ever seen, Lester Piggott, who died this morning.
Most of the time they used to say, you know what to do. And that was the best way.
Driver going clear and stretching out like a great horse. He's coming up to the line, the winner of the 2,000 guineas.
He had that bit of brilliance about him, and he had this great turn of speed. It's marvellous to win in that race every day, isn't it?
Nijinsky coming away from Gerard on the far side, then Stintino, then Craigmore, then Venable. It's Nijinsky, an easy winner of the Derby. Nijinsky the winner.
There's nowhere quite like it. The track is it's different.
It's Lester Piggott on the near side and the Mintro. It's between these two. It's going to be very close. The Mintro on the near side, just the winner.
Lester Piggott's going to take his 30th Classic. Rodrigo de Triano's going to take it at the line. Rodrigo de Triano the winner.
Marvellous, really, you know, to think that people want to meet you, isn't it?
And there we are, ladies and gentlemen. A lifetime bronze of Lester Piggott.
Luck on Sunday, proudly sponsored by Al Basti Equiworld Dubai.